Hello, world. We are live. Welcome to the November 2024 edition of the Laravel Worldwide Meetup. My name is Dan Sapelsa. I'm a developer at Vehicle, and along with myself and my co-host, Margaret Tavares, we are thrilled to once again bring you a couple of awesome talks from a couple incredible members of the Laravel community. Margaret, how are you doing today?
I'm feeling pretty wonderful today, Dan. Thank you so much for asking.
Great. Yeah, it's a little tougher to feel wonderful. I was saying we were chatting before the weather's turning here. It's definitely feeling a little winter-like for us here in Canada, but that doesn't matter because we're going to have a couple great talks here. They're going to brighten our day. So very much looking forward to that. And with that, before we get to our first talk, we've got some sort of community-related things as we normally do, some events coming up and that sort of thing. So with that, Margaret, I will hand off to you. What do we have going on here?
Great. Thanks so much, Dan. So if you haven't heard about Laravel News, it's a great, wonderful resource ran by the great Eric Barnes. They have a weekly email newsletter, so you can check them out at laravelnews.com. I know the latest article that's out there is all the Laravel Black Friday deals that's happening this week. So if you want to take a look, they have a whole entire list that they've curated. So you're going to want to take a look at that. And then we also have a podcast from Jake Bennett and Michael Drinda as well with Laravel News, where we'll discuss all the latest Laravel releases, tutorials, and happenings in the Laravel community. And as well, Michael, on the last episode, shared some insights on another successful Laracon AU. So you'll check them out at laravelnews.com. We also have the Laravel podcast. So it's hosted by the wonderful Matt Stouffer. In their latest episode, he's joined by Taylor Otwell and Jess Archer, where they talk about Laravel Nightwatch. So if you want to learn more, you can check out that episode at laravelpodcast.com.
That episode was live from Laracon AU.
Thanks, Dan. As well as Laravel, Lara Jobs. If you haven't heard about this wonderful resource, if you're someone that's looking to hire Laravel developers, you're looking to post a job, and really for all your Laravel job needs, you can check them out at larajobs.com. As well as Laracast is another wonderful resource. So big thank you to Jeffrey Way for running this awesome resource. It's really for anyone looking to build their Laravel skills. It's a platform to learn with others in the Laravel community. So this week, they also have a 50% off Black Friday sale this week and a wonderful trailer that's coming out that I saw the email recently. So you'll check them out at laracast.com.
I was just checking it out, actually. The banner's up there now. They've got some great sales on, including some incredible artwork. The trailer looks really cool. So yeah, check out laracast.com right now if you haven't got a membership already.
All right, we have some upcoming events that are happening. So Laracon EU is 2 months away. So it's going to be held in Amsterdam next year in 2025. So February 3rd and 4th. And you can check them out at laracon.eu. Tickets are on sale. So if you want to find out some more information, you should go check them out. There's also a great, wonderful meetup called the GTA PHP user group for a dedicated group of PHP developers. So if you'd like to learn with them, you can check them out at meetup.com. They have a bunch of wonderful meetups community that you'd definitely love to be a part of. And then for next month, to close out the year, we have Taylor Otwell coming to join Dan and I for a Q&A session. We're going to be talking about Laravel Cloud, and it's a lot of other different things. We'll also reach out in the community, and we'll have some details at the end of this meetup. So you're going to want to stick around, and we'll talk a little bit more about that.
It's going to be a good one.
And of course, big thank you to our host Vehicle for the support in relaunching this entire meetup. They have a great team of developers. So if you have any Laravel problem, they have a bunch of developers there that would love to help you out. So make sure to hit them up at vehicle.com, or you can email them go@vehicle.com. We also have a JetBrains giveaway, so make sure to scan that QR code. We'll have some more details for you at the end of this meetup, so make sure to stick around for that as well. Well, you'll be able to win 1 of 2 JetBrains product licenses, and we'll contact you if you win. All right, and I'll pass it off to Dan to talk about our wonderful speakers for this month. Very excited to have them, so I'll pass it off to you, Dan.
Thank you, Margaret. And yeah, that brings us to our first speaker for this month, Rissa Jackson. She finds herself right now as the full stack software developer at Loop. Chances are, if you have attended a Laracon event anywhere globally in the last year, you've probably heard Rissa speak. She is the holder of the Laracon Slam, so to speak, speaking at all 4 international official Laracon events. And I think within 1 calendar year, she pulled off the feat. So incredibly impressive, probably an incredible experience for Rissa. And because of that, I can't imagine there is a better person to give the talk that Rissa is going to share today about giving compelling talks at Laracon. So let's bring Rissa in here. Hello, Rissa. How are you today?
Hey, I'm good. How are you both?
Excellent.
Fantastic.
Did you set out to accomplish the Laracon Slam, or is that just how things unfolded?
Definitely how things unfolded. Once I had 3 of them, I was definitely like, Taylor, I really want to speak at US because that would be really cool. So I definitely put a lot of effort into those submissions, but definitely not a plan originally.
Well, very cool nonetheless. Awesome. So with that, then, if you want to share your screen, we can put your slides up on the stage, and then Margaret and I will step backstage, and we'll hand it off to you. All right.
Perfect. Thank you.
You'll do
Slides.
your job as always.
There we go. All right. We'll see you shortly, Rissa. Looking forward to the talk. Start with you shortly.
Talk to you both soon. Okay, so as they both mentioned, I've spoken at a lot of Laracon, so I wanted to kind of craft together some tips and some things I wish I'd known before I started speaking. So from idea to impact, crafting compelling Laracon talks. And I'm Rissa Jackson. They already introduced me, but I'll give a few more details. I am based in Austin, Texas in the US. I'm a full stack software developer. I'm an international speaker, and some of my favorite hobbies are acro, dancing, and board games. So let's go over what we are going to talk about today. First, we need to get from idea to impact. And so to do that, we need to figure out who could talk, why could you talk, and how to get selected. Afterwards, we need to craft a compelling talk. First step is definitely panic, and then prepare, and then I'll leave you with some tips. Hopefully that'll ease some of the panic. Okay, who could talk at Laracon? Definitely you. Really, everyone could talk at Laracon. However, that's maybe not what everyone wants to do. So let's narrow the list down a little bit to people who definitely want to talk at Laracon or might want to talk at Laracon. Some people already know that they want to. They've seen a talk and thought, I could do that. I would love to share my experience, my perspective. Maybe they heard a talk and thought, this is a talk I could have given as well. And then there are people who are more on the fence. They're thinking like, well, you know, that could be really cool, but I'm not quite sure if that's for me. I definitely want to share that you don't need to be a practice public speaker to talk on stage. You don't have to naturally have those gifts. I do not feel that I was naturally given the gift to speak. I was very shy growing up. It's definitely a skill that you can get more comfortable with and build on. What's super important to make you a great speaker is to be passionate. So a really fantastic way to, especially do your first talk, is to pick something that you really could talk about easily. You could talk about for hours. Your eyes light up when you talk about it. Those are things that are going to make you really engaging and a fantastic speaker. And you're definitely going to be a fantastic speaker if you enjoy sharing. Maybe you like to mentor or pair program. Maybe you like to share on Twitter some things that you learn. You make YouTube videos. You like to go on podcasts and talk to people. If that's kind of your personality, you could be a really fantastic speaker. And if you're interested in growing, speaking is a really fantastic way to push your boundaries. And anytime you're pushing your boundaries and stepping outside your comfort zone, you're going to grow as a person. And if that's something that you're interested in, you enjoy doing that, even if it's like a little bit painful in the moment, then speaking on stage could be a great fit for you. And if you have a diverse experience, and actually this one is kind of a gimme because literally everyone has diverse experience. No two people in the Laravel community has the exact same experience. Maybe you pivoted from a very specific field. Maybe you have been doing Laravel from the very beginning. Maybe you're Taylor Otwell and you wrote Laravel. Whatever your experience is unique, and you can bring that perspective. Those will be the kind of talks that you can pull from, the ones that no one else could give, or maybe they could give it, but you have a specific way to introduce it or a way to communicate it that no one else has. All right, why could you talk? There's a lot of fantastic reasons, and I'll go over more, but one of the top of my heart reasons is traveling. I love traveling. I know it's not for everyone, but if traveling is something you really enjoy, speaking at Laracon is a fantastic way to do so. And this is also an excuse for me to show off my Australia photos. I had such a great time meeting these animals. I was extremely excited to meet a koala, So if you're like me and you want to see more of the world and you would love to meet a koala and you get that excited, you should definitely consider speaking at conferences, because this is a fantastic way to see more of the world. Oh, sorry. Another reason you could talk is because it's a great way to network. You get to meet people from all over the world. It's a great way of increasing your luck. Erin Francis would be super proud of you if you put yourself out there and put your voice into the world. This is a way that I've met people from all over and they've become great friends. It's particularly helpful to become friends with other speakers. You connect on similar experiences of the stress of preparing for talks, the stress of having something go wrong and it like bugs you on stage, the stress of preparing those minutes before you get on stage. All of you can relate to those experiences, and so it's a really fantastic way to bond with other people. There's also the opportunity to send ripples out into the world. This is something Michael Dorinda talked about at Laracon Australia in 2023. He talked about, you know, the ripples that come from your putting yourself out there, or trying things, being vulnerable, and you don't even know where some of those ripples can end up. In fact, I relate to this a lot. Jess Archer, Susanna, a lot of people who've spoken at Laracon, their ripples affected me. I saw their talks, I saw them speak, and I thought I could do that too. And so then I speak and then I send ripples out into the world as well. So it's a really great opportunity for you to see what kind of impact you could have, both in ways that you find out about and maybe you never hear about. It's also very fun. And most importantly, you don't need to be an expert. I'm definitely not an expert at most things. And I was certainly not an expert the first time I spoke. The first talk I gave was on Git Interactive Rebase, and I had been programming for 2 years. I was not an expert in Git Interactive Rebase, and I'm still not an expert in that. But it was a really fantastic opportunity for me to get to share something that I found really interesting and was learning about. Sometimes the people who are new to something can teach it even better. So that's a particularly fantastic time to give that talk. And through giving the talk, you can learn a lot more. Okay, maybe you're a little bit more interested. I've gotten you thinking about wanting to give a talk. Now we need to think about how to get selected. You have to get the talks out there. You have to get them picked by a conference. So how does that happen? Luck is super helpful. That's definitely a great way to get talking on a stage. But Erin Francis, in his talk, Publishing Your Work Increases Your Luck, did a really great job highlighting how putting yourself out there can increase your own luck. So it's not just luck that is outside your control, there is luck that is within your control. And a great way to do that is to start trying to speak at tech conferences. Maybe you won't get accepted at the first one or the second one, but if you keep putting yourself out there, people are going to start seeing your name and thinking, like, I should give this person a chance. And we'll talk about other ways to make it more likely for you to get accepted. For example, knowing the conference you want to speak at. Okay, you want to speak at Laracon, but there's 4 Laracons. They're quite different from each other. It's helpful to nail down which Laracon you want to speak at, or are you just open to speaking at all of them? If you're open to speaking at all of them, it's still helpful to think about how they're different and how they're similar when you're applying to them. Laracon Australia is a really fantastic conference for new people. It's around 300 to 400 people. It's a little bit less intimidating and they're super supportive of new people. Whereas Laracon US, while very supportive, is a lot bigger. It's around almost 1,000 people. That's a lot more intimidating. And there's a lot of eyes literally on that stage. So it could be one that you might want to wait to do later after you dip your toes into a less daunting one. It's also helpful to think about who the organizers are and what they're looking for. Taylor Otwell picking for Laracon US is going to want different things than Michael Dorinda wanting for Laracon AU. So trying to get a feel for what they're looking for will help you have more success. And knowing your audience, the people that are going to be in the audience for Laracon Australia are definitely going to be different than the people in the audience for Laracon US. There will be some similar people, but those conferences are very far from each other. Some people are not going to have the ability to go to both. So that is a great way to plan for that conference, is by thinking of who's there. Can you connect with the people in that community? Can you look at talks that have already been given at those conferences to figure out what style of talks do better? It's also going to really help your odds if you submit many options. Now, maybe it's daunting enough to submit one option, and if that's all you feel up for, that's totally fine. Find one topic, get a good title, come up with a paragraph description and send that in, and that's totally fine. However, when organizers are picking their conference lineup, they're going to think about how talks fit with each other. So if you've given them one talk, you've given them one opportunity to fit you in with the other talks. However, if you give them several talks, if they have too many technical talks and they need a little bit more of soft skill talks, then you give them the opportunity to maybe pick one of your other options. Speaking of different types of talks, there are two major styles of talks. There are technical talks and soft skill talks. There's a little bit more nuance that we could get into, but let's start with that high level idea. So maybe you submit a very technical Laravel specific talk to the conference. This is the Laracon after all. You want to make sure you're really on theme. Or maybe you submit that and also a tech talk that is a little bit more applicable to just devs in general, like the Git Interactive Rebase talk I did. That isn't really specific to Laravel, but could work for other people as well. And then you want to maybe offer some soft skill talks. Like I said, sometimes they're full of technical, they need some soft skills, or vice versa. So you submit something that's a bit helpful to devs specifically. How do they problem solve, like Dave did at the Laracon Australia? Or how do you handle the pressure of working on a screen all the time? How can you balance that out? That's some kind of ideas you could talk about. Whereas then you could also think about submitting some talks that are just more helpful to humans in general. Publishing your work increases your luck from Aaron Francis is a talk where it is helpful to developers, but it's kind of just helpful for everyone. So that's kind of a more broad range talk. And you can also find talks that are kind of a combination of both. That could be a really neat way to get the organizer to notice your talk. Another thing that's going to help you get chosen to speak at Laracon is to be a safe speaker. A safe speaker is someone who has shown some examples of speaking, even if it's not at a tech conference, speaking at meetups or speaking on podcasts, making YouTube videos. These are all really fantastic ways to show that you are capable of speaking and you're comfortable speaking. Showing that you're passionate about topics, that will be really helpful to help you stand out. You could be passionate in those examples of you talking, or also in the submission you put in, the proposal you put in for the talk, making sure it's clear that you really enjoy that topic and want to talk about it. Another way is to be prepared and be conscientious of the time. A lot of speakers are great at staying within the time boundary for talks, and organizers really appreciate when that happens. If you're a first-time speaker, they might be more nervous about that. So if you can show examples where maybe at a meetup or something, you're able to stay within the time window pretty close. It doesn't have to be exact, but trying not to go super long or super short will help those organizers feel more confident about choosing you. Okay, we've done all this work and we've been chosen. We have a talk selected. That's super exciting. We now get to celebrate. But what do we do after that? Panic, for sure. This is, for me, an important step every time I speak. I always panic. It's a thing that I do every single time. And every single time I have the thought of this topic is a bad idea. Everyone already knows it. It's way too simple. There's someone better to do this talk. And it's definitely something that I think most of us struggle with. However, knowing that a lot of us struggle with that, maybe that's helpful. It's also important to bring out your imposter syndrome. That one really likes to jump out when you're about to do a talk. You have the days and weeks just before the talk where you start thinking, wow, really shouldn't be me. Everyone's going to find out and they're going to laugh at me. So we have imposter syndrome, we have doubts. These are all really hard things to deal with. So why do we do all this? Well, hopefully I convinced you a little bit in the beginning on why you could or should do a conference talk, but also because it's worth it. As someone who stresses about every talk I do and has those thoughts and panics, I still feel at the end that it's worth it every single time. It's such a cool experience. And you can see some of these other speakers, how excited they are. Luke Downing looks terribly excited to give away what I think is a baking pan. You'll have to watch his video to figure out what happened there at Laracon EU. And Cap looks like a superhero going on stage at Laracon US. So I think knowing the other side and that a lot of us feel it's worth it despite that stress, maybe that will convince you to give it a try. One way that we can lower some of that stress, lower some of that panic is to prepare, take notes. Way I like to start talks is just mulling over the idea as the time is getting closer. Maybe I go on a walk and an idea pops into my head and I write that down. Try to keep all those notes in the same place. It's very annoying if you put them in different places and have to try and track them down later. Try to do your best to write enough notes that you understand it when you look back later. Sometimes you'll look at these notes, weeks or even months later. And if you don't put enough information, you might really not understand what you were trying to tell yourself. Outline, that's a really great way to kind of figure out the flow of the talk and the story you're trying to tell. And definitely get help. Laracon is a really wonderful community. Laravel has a wonderful community. Everyone wants you to succeed. They're happy to help you. Other speakers are excited to help you. They're often going to be in a chat with you for some of the conferences, and you can ask for help. You can ask them to listen to a dry run. You can ask them their tips, and they're all super excited to help. You can also do lots of dry runs. That's a helpful way to kind of figure out what you want to say. Recording it can be a helpful way to make it feel more real, or maybe even having people listen to you will make it feel even more real. The best way to make it real is to do an actual presentation like at a meetup, and then you've really done it and you get to use that opportunity to get feedback and figure out how you can do it better. I will say, though, that preparing helps, but I like to cycle between preparing and panicking. That kind of goes back and forth. That's definitely an important step, is having both of those experiences. But if you've read Hitchhiker's Guide, you should just bring your towel. Okay, so we've prepared a lot. What are some just additional tips from me or other speakers? Figure out your style for speaking. Do you do better with a memorized talk, or do you do better with a general idea? Some people really need to have every word memorized. If you're that type of person, you need to practice it a lot more. Definitely record yourself. If you need a general idea, maybe use the slides to kind of remind you of where you are, and practice it some, but don't practice it so much that it gets robotic. Keep your important points on the slide. It's super easy to forget something while you're speaking. It all goes so fast. And so having the important points there will help you remember to say them. Be authentic. You're the only one who can give the talk the way you give it. Even if it's a subject that's been given many times, for example, Get Interactive Rebase. Other people have given talks on Get or Get Interactive Rebase, but maybe you can say it in a way that's different than other people. Maybe someone will hear it and it will get through to them in some new way. So don't feel like just because you are giving a talk that other people have given that you don't have something unique to bring to the table, and really lean into what works for you and what feels comfortable. Don't try to copy other speakers' styles, because it might just work better for them and not be a good fit for you. But also be open to borrowing things from them, because, you know, it's important to see what other people do and take inspiration from that. Borrowing, not stealing. And borrowing goes best if you remix it and make sure that it is not just a copy and paste of what they do. And if it is, maybe acknowledge it and give them credit. Live coding is super hard. It's hard your first time, it's hard your fifth time, but it's particularly hard the first time. So maybe don't do that for your first talk. You can, but if any one of you have done pair programming, you probably know that experience of how hard it is to type when people are watching you. And then when you have 300 to 1,000 people watching you, it is very hard to type. I messed up the password for my computer like 5 times before getting on stage. And I was like, wow, no one's watching what I'm typing. And I've done this every day, but still so hard because I'm so nervous. So do yourself a favor, try not to live code. Slides are definitely safer. And then also, no one knows the plan. You know, if something goes wrong, you are going to be hyper aware of that. Or if things aren't going exactly the way you thought they would go, you're the one that knows that better than anyone else. So try to keep that in mind. Don't panic. Don't just let everything hang in the air in front of everyone. Just keep talking through it. Try to make jokes. Know that things go wrong. There are mistakes that happen. And it's okay. People don't know what you were trying to do. So whatever happens is going to be what happens. And hopefully it is wonderful too. And sometimes things going wrong is actually more fun and better than your original plan. So speaking of getting help from other people, I reached out to some other speakers to get some of their tips. I definitely know that they know things that I don't know, and I got some really valuable insight from asking them. Some of these things were just from podcasts they had done or things that I found that they had already mentioned. Joe T is not just a speaker, but he is an organizer for the PHP Meetup. And so he had some really great insight that Laracon might be a bit stressful for your first time speaking. Meetups are such a nice way to dip your toes into speaking. You can figure out if you even like talking. Do you like this topic? What works, what doesn't work? There's usually less people. It might not be recorded. So there are a lot of ways to feel less stressed about that experience and feel like you get to dip your toes in without diving in head first. And his other tip is less is more. There's only so much that an audience can absorb. So try not to pack too much into the talk, because it's definitely going to get lost. If you simplify it a bit, then maybe they will absorb more of your information. The wonderful Just Archer gave some tips as well. Mistakes happen. Try to talk through it, make jokes through it if you can. Try not to freeze. Honestly, some of the most fun talks I've seen have had some mistakes happen and they've handled it super well. Try to make your dry runs as real as possible for at least some of them. Having someone there, recording it, those things are helpful. And she recommended breathing exercises. This is something I might have to try for myself. And she mentions it will go fast. And I can definitely agree with that. It will go fast. It just flies by every time. And then Marty had some tips. He said, try to be conversational and do not read slides word for word. Oh, sorry, Marty. I fell into that trap. But yeah, trying to keep your slides a bit shorter, not putting all you want to say on them will help you avoid reading your whole slide. He also mentions that tech conferences like Laracon are not just for teaching tech, there are for sharing ideas and perspectives. There's so many different ways to contribute. And sometimes doing something that's not technical can be really helpful for the audience. Some people in the audience are going to be super technical, but some won't. And they might just super love that there is a talk that they can appreciate and that is something they can listen to and get something out of. So keep that in mind when you're submitting talks. Dave Hicking said, show your personality. People want to see your style of talk. They want to support you. Don't be too hard on yourself. All of us doubt, all of us worry over every mistake, and all of us are trying to be here to support you in the audience. So try to remember those things when you're worried about your talk. Zuzana said, play your favorite song. She has a favorite song for a tech conference, and when she listens to it later, it reminds her of that tech conference. I think this is a really cool one. I'm definitely going to try this later. James Brooks said, nobody is there to see you fail. I super agree with this. We all want you to succeed. And when things go wrong, we often try to shout out helpful comments, oh, you missed a semicolon, or you got this. Everyone wants you to succeed. So keep that in mind for your first talk if you haven't done one yet. Steven says to find the story. I think this is a great tip. There is a story that's within your talk, and you have to kind of dig through to find it. After doing your talk a couple of times and making the outline and writing notes, you kind of start to feel what the story is, what the theme is, what you're trying to say. If you can find that, then it becomes a real talk, not just info dump. A lot of people love stories. As humans, we crave hearing stories. Shruti said to learn from previous speakers. This is a really great one for getting your talk selected. So Shruti is saying, look at, let's say Laracon US or Laracon India, and see what kind of talks have happened there and what titles they've used. Use that as inspiration for what would work well for you. And maybe even reach out to some of those speakers and ask them how you can get into that conference, what helps, what their tips are. Michael Drinda is a really fantastic person to learn from because he's an organizer. He knows what he's looking for his conferences. And he did a really fantastic podcast, Hallway Track, pitching the perfect Laracon talk. This is really relevant to this talk. It really goes over what he's looking for, what stood out to him, how you can get noticed. And one of the main things he highlighted was the title is the hook. So you really want to kind of sell your talk with the title. And you want to bring a lot of energy and passion. That's something that really stands out to Michael. Mitchell Davis submitted a talk for Laracon AU, and he mentioned this in the podcast, and it wasn't selected, but he was one of the last, he was shortlisted for it. And Michael reached out to him and told him, try again. And Mitchell did, and he pitched his talk and showed a lot of energy and passion. He even sent a video about his pitch to Michael, and that really influenced Michael in picking him for this Laracon. So keep at it. And then, of course, we got to learn from Taylor Otwell. He's the creator of Laravel himself, and he's the one who's going to be picking talks for Laracon US, if that's what you're interested in. On the Laravel podcast with Matt Stauffer, Laravel 11 Reverb, and there were other things in the title, but it's long. I'm not going to put that all on the slide. Taylor Otwell talks about what he looks for, and he said that general talks go better than niche talks. You want talks that can be relevant for a large part of the audience, not just a small part. And he also mentions that finding recordings of the speakers somewhere will help him get a feel for how they could do as a speaker. So keep those things in mind if you want to speak at Laracon US. And my most important tip is, if at first you don't succeed, try again. Learn from Mitchell, learn from me, learn from a bunch of speakers. We've all submitted to conferences and not had something picked. And it's sad, and it makes us feel a little down when we see those conferences, but we know that it wasn't this time, maybe it's next time. So keep at it. Don't let yourself get shot down once and then give up. Keep going. Thank you all so much for having me here. I've been Rissa Jackson. This is my social media stuff, and I'm so delighted to get to spend this morning with all of you.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Rissa.
Thank you so much, Rissa.
Excellent. Yes, a lot of great insights and tips there. We'll dive into a couple of them here. I think I laughed a couple of times when you kept going back to panic there. for anyone that's been following the Laravel Worldwide Meetup, we at Vehicle kind of took over hosting duties almost a year ago. That was back in January, and that was a big part of my prep for the first episode. It was just a lot of panic, and but I think that the panic with the prep, I think, is really the key there, right? And I think the more you prepare, I've had this experience so many times in my life, public speaking or otherwise, the more you prepare for something, the better it generally goes, right? Failing to prepare is preparing to fail, is the old saying, right? So that was I think normal to feel panic, right? Or normal to feel those things, right? But there's how you deal with how you approach it. And if you can channel that into preparedness, then I think you're probably setting yourself up more for success. Would you agree?
Definitely. Yeah. Preparing is a very important part of it. And yeah, as you said, we have to panic at least a little bit.
Yeah, I was chuckling a lot listening to your talk as well, because I can definitely echo what Dan was feeling. I myself, even right now, I'm just feeling my hands with pretty clammy, you know, like all the time, whenever you're kind of like ramping up to do something, when you care a lot about it, obviously it means a lot to you. And so that's where these nerves definitely come from, at least for me. And then seeing your slide about imposter syndrome back in like, I don't know how many years ago, Dan, maybe like 5 years ago now, at least, we did like a podcast on imposter syndrome and how relevant that really is to feel like, do I really know what I'm talking about? But you know what? If it hits you, I mean, that's something, other people love hearing about experiences as well. And so hearing that from you too, Rissa, definitely, it meant a lot. There's a lot of things going on there in my head where I was like, I feel that same way.
Yeah, I'd like to share a thought actually from the chat here that JT shared. He said, I think my biggest thing that is, I don't know how to find a topic that I feel I could speak with any authority on. How do you look at your personal knowledge base and say, I should share this? And there was some more chat about that, but that definitely resonates with me too, right? And I think that's something I've struggled with, but maybe gotten over a little bit of like, you don't need to be the expert, right? If you position yourself as an expert, then you're probably going to set yourself up for failure, right? But if you come into it from the standpoint of like, hey, I don't know much, or I only know so much, and oftentimes I find that the talks I've seen where people like say that a lot, like I'm no expert on this, they end up giving a talk where it's like, man, you know an awful lot about this thing, right? So you kind of are an expert even if you don't feel like it, right? But I think if you just position yourself with what you know, I'm just someone learning this thing as well, but I thought this was cool and I'm passionate about this thing, and I think those make for really, really good talks.
Definitely. I couldn't say it better. I agree that learning, like through preparing for the talk, you will learn so much more about it. And I think that's a great tool if you want to learn more about something. Maybe there's like a technology or something about Laravel that you don't know as well as you'd like. Giving yourself the pressure of giving a talk on it is a great way to deep dive on it. So you don't already have to be the expert on it. And also, yeah, like there's so many different ways to give talks, and being a non-expert can be a really, really fantastic way to give a talk. You're more in touch with the people who don't know about the talk. So you actually might do a better job on the talk because you will remember all the things that didn't make sense for you, all the like pitfalls of the topic. Whereas the person who knows that topic inside and out, they might actually have a harder time explaining the topic. So I definitely agree that don't let not being the subject matter expert stop you. And in fact, let it kind of empower you.
Yeah. I guess one other thing that kind of resonated during your talk, Rissa, that I'm curious your thoughts on this, and I saw some comments in the chat, but just recently I went to Cascadia PHP and I met up with Omni, and Omni just posted something in the comments where do you ever look back at like your first talk? Because the thing for me, it's like the very first time, sure, I'm super uncomfortable talking about something, but the more you push yourself or you put yourself in that like uncomfortable feeling, the more you'll grow from it. And so have you ever looked back or like had a retrospective on like what your first experience was talking versus when your most recent talk was? Kind of, can you explain that experience a little bit?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think we all have that experience of when we look back at our past self, we feel some cringe about like, wow, that wasn't as good as what I can do now. I mean, we feel this often when we look at code we wrote a long time ago. You know, there's that experience of like, who wrote this code? And then you do get blame and it's you and you're like, oh, I wrote that code. It's kind of similar with talking sometimes, but you know, sometimes you write code a long time ago and you're still pretty proud of it. And that can also be an experience with talking. You know that you did the best you could with the tools you had at that time, and that's great. And maybe you've gotten better and grown from there. And that's also great. Both of those are nice ways to look at past talks and past work.
Yeah, thanks for phrasing that so nicely. And yeah, again, also another thing that you were mentioning in your talk is find something that, or I guess a lot of people in the comments have also been sharing that as well. It's find something you struggled with, or find something that others don't know. That's something that always resonates with at least somebody, or there's another person to reflect on. Yeah, thank you, Dan.
Omni here shared this. My first talk, I think this is maybe similar to the Git rebase talk you mentioned, Rissa. My first talk was born because I wrote a couple of Git hooks for my team. No one else in the team knew how that was done, so I started researching it. Just find something that others don't know.
Right. Yeah, that's super a great way to share knowledge with other people and make a great talk. If you don't know it, someone else doesn't know it.
Mm-hmm. And I think like the talks I've enjoyed most at various conferences I've been to and taken the most from are not the, big paradigm shifting. Oh my goodness, I just see the world in a different light now. It's the ones where there's been little nuggets of wisdom shared throughout that I can take and put into my work like the next day or the next week. Those are the ones, right? And I think like something like this could, like anything Git related, that's going to have a very wide surface area. That's something that a lot of people deal with. There's probably something you can share in there. I continually feel like I know about 8% of what Git can do, right? So there's probably a lot of talks that people could share little Git tricks and tips that I would take a lot from and be able to incorporate right away, which I find much more valuable than some paradigm shifting kind of presentation.
Yeah, I think if you, go ahead, Margaret.
Oh, sorry, Rissa, please go for it.
Oh, I was going to say, if you like start out to do a paradigm shifting talk, I think that's when your panic and imposter syndrome are going to really knock you down. So it's helpful to sometimes pick a smaller chunk to try like a Git thing.
Definitely. So yeah, sorry about that, Rissa. Another question that we have here for you is from Jan. So how do you handle or respect the given timing? So practicing even in front of a small or big audience takes probably less time than the real talk.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say that there's a little bit of difference between your practice run and your real talk. For some people, your real talk is going to be a bit slower than your practice run, and other people, it's much faster. You kind of want to get a feel for that over time of what you end up doing usually. But doing those dry runs and getting a feel for the ballpark of where you're hitting is really helpful. Like, if it talks 30 minutes, it's okay if it's over a little bit or under a little bit. Most organizers are going to be a little forgiving if it's not perfect. In fact, most organizers aren't expecting perfection. Although I did see one talk at Laracon Australia that was super fantastic from Jack, and he timed it with a timer on screen and had to finish at the exact right second. And so for him, he needed to practice that a lot and be really ready for that to work perfectly. But for most of us, there's a little wiggle room. And just getting that earlier experience gives you a ballpark of what you're working with. And as long as you're pretty close to what you're aiming for, usually it works out.
Do you have any tips, Rissa, for when you're actually giving the talk, though, to track how your pacing is? Am I ahead of schedule, behind schedule? Personally, I feel like if I had a running timer, that would almost increase my anxiety. But I would want to know, am I going too fast or slow? Any tips or insights there?
Some conferences will have a clock for you, and it will let you know how much time you have left. That can be really nice. And also, like you said, sometimes increase your stress, especially if you're running out of time or there's a lot of time left and you don't know that you're on track enough to make that work. But I would say that it's helpful if you can have some kind of clock that you can check in with a little bit. Maybe try not to stare at that clock, because I think that really increases your stress. But having check-in moments where you're like, okay, like I'm like roughly on track, knowing like, that you have like roughly 5 minutes left and you're getting close to the end of your slides or the end of your demo, that can be a really nice way to figure out, do I need to shorten some of what I'm saying or take my time a bit more and fill out the time a little bit? There's definitely improv a bit with talks unless you're doing a super specific time talk like Jack did. But I would say even for him, I bet you he had things that he could pull in or pull out or throw in if he was a little bit off where he wanted to be on time. I don't know for sure, but I bet you, he had a little wiggle room in his talk to make sure that he stayed on time too.
Yeah, it seems like some good insight if to have an idea of like, if I needed to, I could skip this or I could gloss over this point. It kind of reminds me a little bit of I know for stand-up comedians, often they'll have like, hey, you've got 3 minutes left or whatever, right? So I think having it that not that I'm ending right now, but I know I've got a few minutes to wind down, and I can kind of maybe modify the last few slides and how I present them. That seems like a good thing to have a contingency plan for.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Out of curiosity, have you ever dealt with, I know Wi-Fi at conferences can be an issue sometimes, and then you're trying to do things live that require a network connection. Have you ever dealt with any of those challenges, and any tips or insights there for people?
Yeah, definitely. Some conferences have a Wi-Fi that's specific for the speakers. I think it's great when they do this, especially if they do like a tech check and you can like practice anything before. Especially if you have something that requires internet. My slides require internet slightly, and then some people do stuff where they're like, sending something to GitHub, and so they really need to make sure that works. Like they're pushing something live or deploying something live. So you really need to make sure that stuff works. So that tech check is a great time to test some of that stuff. Some conferences put you on the same Wi-Fi as everyone, and that can be a little bit more scary because you don't know how well that's going to go during your talk. So I recommend seeing what your contingency plans can be for that. If you know you need Wi-Fi and you know you need a good, strong one, can you use a hotspot from your phone? Maybe that would be better. Is there other options you can do? I definitely would recommend testing that stuff out as much as you can beforehand, and know that sometimes things are just going to go wrong and you're going to have to work through that. Laracon US, I think Caleb Porcio was going to talk and it just wasn't working. So he did like kind of stand-up comedy for like 20 minutes with Aaron Francis, and it was really funny. He did a great job of like handling that, and things just happen sometimes. We're working with technology. We all know it fails sometimes.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was definitely a point I was going to make. I think that Aaron and Caleb did a masterful job, right? And I remember sitting in the audience in the moment being like, this is a difficult thing to do, right? If I'm in Caleb's shoes, I'm so focused and ready to give that talk. You're probably thinking about the night before, the morning rolls around, like, let's go. And then you got to delay things half an hour or whatever. So yeah, they did a great job just staying loose. And I'm sure it didn't feel so loose inside for them, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, learning how to wing it is definitely a skill on its own. So maybe that could be a talk too.
All right. Any other questions or comments from the chat, Margaret, that you see that we?
Those are the questions that we got going on.
All right. I think maybe the last point for me and takeaway is there was a couple of the speakers that you shared that shared their insights, was just the idea of being authentic, right? And I think like when you're giving a talk, you have sort of like a voice to your talk, and I think the more you kind of try to put, play a character and have some button up version that's not you, the less it's going to be, you're not gonna be able to give that talk well, and I think it's not going to resonate with people as much, right? So the more you can try to be yourself, it's probably going to make it just that much easier to give the talk. In addition to, I think it's the personal, the little quirks about individual presenters that really connect with people often, right? As opposed to trying to just be a robot that's giving a presentation.
For sure. Yeah, I completely agree with that. It can be hard if you feel like you're not the strongest speaker, or you do things like they or stuff like that. But sometimes people really enjoy seeing those, kind of imperfections in giving talks. They like give a talk character, and they just show who you are. And so don't be too scared of not having a perfectly polished talk every time.
I agree. Yeah. Excellent. All right. Well, if we no more comments and questions right now, I want to once again thank you, Rissa, for joining us. That was awesome insights, certainly for presenting at and speaking at Laracon, but I think there's a lot of great just general conference speaking advice in there, and public speaking advice. So lots of nuggets of wisdom you shared from yourself and others in the community. So thank you very much for joining us and sharing your thoughts today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
thank you so much for having me. Oh, sorry, Mark.
No, that's my policy. This is just the human interaction. It's all good. But anyways, thanks so much, Rissa. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rissa. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
See you.
All right. Thank you very much, Rissa. That was excellent. Lots of engagement from the chat there. But yeah, we have a second speaker this month as well. We're super excited about. So without further ado, we're going to bring him in here. Our second speaker this month is Sandro Gehri. He currently finds himself as the technical lead at Trenda. He's the creator of the OpenAI PHP like organization on GitHub. There's clients in there for OpenAI for PHP and Laravel and Symfony. So if you're working with OpenAI and certainly in a Laravel application, I would definitely check that out. And then Sandro is also the author of the Pest mutation testing plugin. I think Nuno presented some of these features at Laracon US this past summer. And Sandro is going to join us today and kind of give a high level, I think, intro to what is mutation testing, and then maybe how can you incorporate some of that into your application to kind of make your code a little more resilient. And there he is joining us. Hello, Sandro. How are you?
Hello. Sorry, my voice. I'm fine, thanks. And you?
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Yeah, mutation testing is certainly something that I'd known existed. I hadn't gone deep into trying to incorporate it, and probably partially because it maybe felt daunting to get started with. But I imagine within Pest, it's probably fairly easy to get going with. So really excited to hear what you have to share and what insights you have, and how I imagine to our last talk, this is going to be one of those talks where I can take something away probably right away and incorporate to some of my daily work. So looking forward to it.
And all the way from Switzerland too. So thanks so much for joining us, Sandro.
Sandro, if you'd like to share your screen, we'll get you
Yes.
presenting, and then Margaret and I will step backstage and we'll hand it off to you.
Right.
There we go. I see a nice slide there.
You can see the slide.
Go.
Perfect.
That's your test suite. All right, Sandro, the stage is yours. We're going to step backstage. Take it away, and we'll talk to you shortly.
Good luck.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure and honor for me to be able to speak here and share my passion for testing with all of you. And as Rissa said before, to be passionate, I think that's one of the most important things. But she also said that live coding isn't the best idea to start with. So we will see how it goes. But now let's get started. My topic of today is test your test suite with mutation testing in Pest PHP. The next slide we can skip because Dan already mentioned everything that's on this slide. Now, I have a little advertisement to place here. As I said before, as Dan said before, I'm from Switzerland. And if you are from Switzerland as well, or plan to travel here, I have good news for you. We just founded the Swiss Laravel Association, which is going to organize the in-person Laravel meetups in Switzerland. If you are interested, please visit our website or follow us on social media. But back to topic. Now, when you ask ChatGPT what mutation testing is, you get something like that. Mutation testing is a software technique used to evaluate the quality of test cases by introducing small changes, mutations, into the source code of your program. These changes are designed to mimic common coding errors, and the purpose is to check if the existing test suite can detect and fail when these mutations are present. If a test suite fails to detect the mutation, it suggests that the test suite may not be robust enough. Well, this explanation isn't too bad, but we will break it down in a bit and see some practical examples. But something else we can get from the answer is the fact that ChatGPT knows what mutation testing is, even it has been introduced in Pest v3 only a couple months ago. But this makes sense, as the concept of mutation testing is already quite old. In fact, the original proposed version by Richard Lipton was already back in 1971, which means the concept is already over 50 years old. But even the idea is already around for such a long time, most of developers I talked to before and during I developed the mutation testing plugin for Pest haven't heard of the concept so far. And to be honest, I wasn't aware of the concept for a long time either. It must be said that in the PHP world, there is already a more or less famous library for mutation testing called Infection PHP. But having a tool integrated into Pest gives us some nice features and frictionless developer experience, which wouldn't have been possible with an external library. And this leads us to my motivation for writing the plugin in the first place. My goal is to make the concept of mutation testing as widely known as possible and combine this with a good developer experience. When we go back to the explanation from before, we can see that there are two important steps. First, introducing a small change into the source code, and second, check if the existing test suite can detect the failure. Now, this sounds fairly simple, and in fact it is. Let's see what this looks like in practice. Now, imagine we have a little we have a sign-up form for a newsletter on our website. The only thing you can do is to subscribe for the newsletter by providing your name and your email address. Now, let's jump into PHP Storm. In the application, we have a controller which takes the request, validates the input, saves the data into the newsletter subscriber model into the database, dispatches the subscribed event, and then returns the newly created subscriber. Of course, we have a test for this as well. In the test file, we have two Pest tests. One checks if the user can sign up for the newsletter, and the second one checks if the name and the email fields are empty, if it returns the appropriate validation error. Now, when we go to the terminal, where it is, here it is, we can run Pest. And by the way, PE is my alias for vendor bin Pest. And when we run Pest, we can see that we have two tests, and they are both passing. Now, mutation testing told us we should introduce a change in our test, in our application code. Let's do this by hand first. Back in our controller, for example, we can remove the whole validation and take the relevant data directly here from the request. Running Pest again, now we can see we have one test failing, or in fact two tests failing, but the one we are interested in is the one with the status code 422. This status code isn't returned anymore because we have removed the validation. Let's change. Something else mutation testing can do for us, it can, for example, remove this line here, the dispatching of the subscribed event. Do it manually once again. Let's run Pest. We can see both of the tests are passing, and that's not really good, or in other words, it tells us that there is something missing in our tests. What we can do to fix or to improve our test suite, we already faked the events with the event facade. We can event assert dispatched of the subscribed event. When we now run our test suite again, for sure we have one failure, that it is the subscribed event was not dispatched. Now we know when we return the line in the controller, both tests are passing now. That's what we want. It was very easy to improve our test suite, but it's not that easy then when you already have your controller and your test to find the weaknesses in your test in your test suite. We had to remove the line to see that this assertion was missing, and that's something mutation testing can help with. Now revert this once again, just to be the starting point. Something I want to talk first before we start into using mutation testing with Pest is the quality of your test suite. Often a coverage report is used to determine if the quality of your test suite is good. So you can run Pest with the coverage option. Typing is hard in front of many people, right? When we start mutation testing with Pest with the coverage report, we can see that we have 100% test coverage on the newsletter subscribe controller. When we go to the test, remove one of the tests, run the coverage report again, we can still see that we have 100%. So even if we have reduced the quality of our test suite, we still have 100% line coverage. This makes sense because the happy path goes from top to the bottom and hits every line. So there is no way for the code coverage to tell us that we should improve our test suite. So I think a coverage report with line coverage isn't too bad, but it isn't really a good metric to tell us something about the quality of our test suite. Excuse me. Now back to mutation testing. Let's ensure that we have nothing revert everything. So first, now mutation testing with Pest is fairly easy. You just type Pest and then add the option --mutate. When we execute this one first, but the first time, we can see that we have an error. Mutation testing forces us to tell mutation testing what it should mutate, because mutation testing is quite time consuming, and we will come back to performance later. So we have, it gives us different options to tell mutation testing what it should actually mutate. One option is to pass a class or a namespace with the class option, or paths, or we have even an option to mutate everything if we really want to have this. The other option we can use is to add covers or mutates method right on top of the testing controller. And I think that's the more sustainable approach. To do this, we head back to our test file and add the mutates right on the top, and then we specify which class it should mutate. This is the class that we actually want to test from this test file, or this test file here is responsible for testing this class. Not only helps us this with mutation testing, I think it gives us some nice features in the IDE, because when we are in the controller, we can jump right back to the test, and we can jump from the test back to the controller. This wasn't possible before because we are not using the controller directly, we're just using the route here. As I said before, there are two options. We can use mutates or covers. From a mutation testing perspective, that's exactly the same, but covers uses the covers function from PHP unit behind the scenes, so it will affect your coverage report. That's the reason why I prefer to have mutates. If you want to learn more about the covers method, you can read docs from PHP unit, how it affects your coverage report. Now, after we have added this mutates function on top of the test file, we can now go to our terminal again and run mutation testing again. And this time we can see it does something different. Let's start at the bottom from the output. What we can see here is that we have 7 mutations. 4 of them are considered as tested, and 3 of them were untested. Untested means that none of our tests was able to detect the change we made, or the mutation testing made. And what we also can find is a new metric, the score, and we can see it's less than 60%. And this is quite a heavy difference compared with the 100% line coverage we saw before. And what we can see on the last line is the duration. It took nearly 2 seconds, which is quite long for only a couple lines of code tested. Therefore, we always recommend to run mutation testing in parallel. For this, we just pass the parallel option, and then the same tests are performed, but it only takes around half a second. For the rest of this demonstration, we will work without the parallel option because it gives us a little bit more of a verbose output. Now, what we can see up here, we have 3 untested mutations, and they are all listed with a diff output where we can see what it has actually changed. This one here, it was the remove method call mutator, which was applied to the newsletter subscribe controller on line 25, and it has removed the subscribed event dispatching as we did it manually before. So we already know how we can fix this one. Once again, assert dispatched the subscribed event. And when we run mutation testing again, we can see that we only have 2 untested mutations, and the one on line 25, the remove method call, is now tested with this green tick here. So we have 2 untested mutations left. Let's take a closer look. They both remove an array item. One time it removes the email validation rule, and the other removes the unique rule on the email field as well. Now, to fix one of them, it's very easy. Let's take this one here with the email. We go to our test. We can copy this test here. A test email is valid. We pass an email address here, which is invalid. And we want to ensure, of course, that the email validation error is returned. Run mutation testing again, and we can see we have only 1 untested mutation, and that's the one with the unique rule. Now, sometimes you have mutations you don't consider as relevant. For for this, we have an option. We can add pest mutate ignore here on this line, and mutation testing will ignore this line now. We can already see only 6 mutations were created, so it stops creating the mutation, and of course it does not test this mutation when it's not created on before. I wouldn't recommend doing this in this case. It's only for demo purposes, but sometimes it's really handy to ignore 1 or more mutations if you are not interested in them. Now, what we can see, we have reached a score of 100%. This still does not mean that your test suite is perfect, but I think we can say that now the test suite has a higher quality than before, and this metric has more meaning than just a simple line coverage. Right. What you can do with the score is you can enforce that we should have a minimal score, for example, 90%. So when we are going back to our controller and remove the annotation here to ignore this line, then we can see we have 7 mutations again. 1 of them has failed. This gives us a score of around 85%, and we did not hit our level or minimal threshold of 90%, and the whole process fails. This is especially helpful when you want to use it in your CI pipeline, for example. Now, all the examples we saw so far had something in common. mutation testing always performed a change when it removed something from the source code. But of course, it can do much more than that. To demonstrate this, we switch to a different example. First, revert everything. So, imagine we have a web shop and we sell drinks which can contain alcohol or not, and we want to ensure that we only sell them to people older or equal to 18 years. So we have a simple drink policy. If the drink does not contain alcohol, we immediately return true because everyone can buy the drink. Otherwise, we take the date of birth, the different years, and check if it's equal or higher to 18. Now again, we have a test file. Let's activate all of that. This test file has 3 tests for the policy. One is a user under 18 cannot buy a drink with alcohol. So we have a user aged 10 with a drink that contains alcohol, and we expect the policy to return false. The next test case, the user is over 18, so it's a user age 25, a drink with alcohol, and we expect that he is allowed to buy this drink, so it should return true. And last but not least, a drink without alcohol, we expect, of course, a true as well. Now, let's see what happens when we do run mutation testing on this test or on this policy. We can see once again, 8 mutations were created and 4 of them were untested. Let's take a closer look at the first one. It's the remove early return mutator that made this change here. It removed the return true, and besides that, this change wasn't detected. There's something else interesting here. There is a mutation returning this one, but there is no mutation returning this one, so we cannot see one on line. I think this should be line 16 where it removes. So there is no mutation removing this line. The reason is we have here expect here a Boolean to be returned. So the mutation testing is clever enough to say, okay, I can remove this early return statement here, but it makes no sense to remove the last return statement. Otherwise, we have a code that is not working in the first place. And Pest tries to reduce the number of these mutations because for all the mutations, it has to run the test suite again. So for performance considerations, it needs to have some knowledge how PHP actually works and what is a possible change that not breaks the code and which are changes that will break the code in the first place. Yeah, but what is interesting here from the testing, from the testing or the testing side is that removing the early return statement didn't break one of the tests. The reason for this is I made a mistake when I created these 3 tests here. Maybe you have seen it before. When we check if all users can buy a drink without alcohol, I took a user that is age 25. And the user age 25 is always allowed to buy this drink. This should be a minor instead and not an adult person. So when we run mutation testing again, we can see we have only 3 untested mutations, and the one from before, the remove early return, has now a green tick. Once again, it's not hard to fix, but it would be really hard to see when you make a review for this test file to spot this error only from scanning through the tests by yourself. Now, we have 3 untested mutations left here. They are all on the same line, it's line 16, and they do all something similar. The first one replaces the operator from greater to equal to greater. and the other two decrement and increments the integers. What this means, we have a problem that we don't test for the boundaries. So mutation testing forces us to test the boundaries better. Imagine one of your colleagues changed this operator here from greater to equal to greater. It's a tiny change in a large PR. Nobody will see this when reviewing the PR, and the CI pipeline will not fail. So that's a problem. So we should test for the boundaries here. The easiest option to test for the boundaries is we add another test with a data set and three different data provided. The age is 17, 18, and 19. And we expect false, true, or true to be returned. So when we test for the boundaries, now everything is green, all the mutations are tested, and the test suite is much more robust because it can now detect more changes that were probably accidentally added. So the test quality has improved, and we have a better score here as well. Now, I showed you, come on, where it is. So now I've showed you a lot of examples and what mutation testing can do for us. Let's step back a little and talk about what's going on behind the scenes when mutation testing is run. I tried to pack this into a flowchart and walk you through all the steps performed to give you a better understanding of how it works. But more important, to give you a sense for the challenges you might face when you are using mutation testing in large applications. First, when we execute mutation testing, it runs the initial test suite. So it executes all the tests, applies the filter, so you maybe pass into the test execution, and it creates a coverage report, a line coverage report behind the scenes. We will come back to this one later. Then it checks if all the tests pass, and if not, it immediately stops and returns the normal Pest testing output, because mutation testing cannot run without the passing test suite in the first place. Then, if all the tests have passed, it tries to find all the possible mutations in the code or in your application code. It applies filter, so it only mutates classes that you are passed in by the option or with the mutates function call. And it uses caching to store the found mutations in a cache, because crafting these mutations is very resource intensive. It has to parse all your code and compare it with the mutators from the library. So it caches these results for subsequent runs of mutation testing. Then it checks if it has found at least one mutation. If not, it exits because no mutation, so there is no mutation testing to perform. Normally, it will find more than one mutation. Then it takes exactly one. It checks if it has covering. Sorry, I have to drink something. So it takes one mutation, and it goes back to the coverage report from the beginning and check if there is at least one test that covers the line that was mutated. If not, it immediately considers the mutation as uncovered. That's something we haven't seen examples before, but that's something you would see with a normal coverage output as well, line coverage as well, because this is decided based on a code coverage. So it does not run any tests on this mutation, it just marks it as uncovered. Then it checks it if it has more mutations, it takes the next one, checks for covering tests, and if it can find some covering tests, it will mutate the application code. Then it runs all the tests that are covering these mutations, or the original lines before the mutation has happened. Then it checks if all the tests pass, and if they all pass, we have an untested mutation, as we saw before. In other libraries, you may see the term escaped instead of untested. Then it goes once again, check if it has more, go to this loop over and over, and always checks if all the tests pass. If at least one of the tests fails, it considers the mutation as tested, as we saw before. The other term here, sometimes used, is killed. So don't get confused when you read about mutation testing. Sometimes it's not untested, tested, sometimes it's escaped, killed, or there are more other terminologies used sometimes. Yeah, and it loops again and again until no more are left, and then it exits the process, displays the summary we saw before, and calculates this mutation score, which you can use as a metric for your test suite quality. What you already can see from the graph is that the number of tests executed with mutation testing can be much higher than in a normal test run, because it needs to run at least some of the tests over and over again. One thing that you cannot see but impacts the performance heavily is the way PHP works. When a PHP file is mutated, when a PHP file is loaded from the file system, there is no way to mutate the code later on because it's already parsed and cached. Therefore, running the tests on the mutated code requires PHP to spin up a new process, a new Pest process, a new PHP process, and executes the test there. That's the reason why the coverage report is so important, to only execute the tests if there is really a test that covers the mutated code. Otherwise, also we can save a lot of resources if we don't run them if not necessary. By the way, this code mutation does not happen on the file system, so Pest will never mess up with your application code. Back to performance. I talked about performance before and why it's so important. So as we saw before, mutation testing is slow by design because it has to execute tests over and over. But the library tries to do its best to do it as fast as possible. So it only runs the covering test, as we saw before. It caches the mutations, it caches results. There's a lot of caching going on behind the scenes. And you have the option to run the mutations in parallel. And from a developer perspective, there are something you can do. You can only run the relevant tests. So don't run the whole test suite, filter it down to the controller test or the unit test or whatever it's appropriate for the mutations or the classes you want to mutate. Then tell the system which classes you want to mutate or which namespace or directory, and use options like bail or retry to reorder the tests or to exit when the first mutation is untested and so on. There are more options in the docs, so check them out if you run into performance issues. Now, before we go to this slide, I want to show something really nice, because PHP Storm in the very latest release, I think it came out 1 week ago, it added support for mutation testing in PHP Storm. So you can directly click here, Pest with mutation testing, and you will get the mutation testing output directly in PHP Storm, which I think is very handy to run it on a particular test. Now, this was a brief introduction on what is going on behind the scenes of mutation testing, where I showed the graph before. And I hope it helps to understand a bit how it works and what the challenges with mutation testing can be. Before we wrap it up, I would like to talk about another important aspect. As I mentioned earlier, mutation testing needs some sort of understanding of how PHP works. Other languages with different syntaxes need a different set of mutators because the language does not behave the same way. The current set of mutators in this library is optimized for plain PHP, but it has no knowledge of frameworks or libraries or packages you have installed in your project. So, for example, this function, email has domain. It checks if the email ends with the given domain. Mutation testing could replace the string ends with a string starts with, because the library knows that this is the opposite, the same function, but the opposite behavior, or the opposite function for the behavior. But if you do the same thing the Laravel way with the string helper and ends with method, mutation testing would never replace this with start with, because it does not know that this is the opposite function. The same applies for other helpers like the collection helper or the HTTP facade, or all the other good stuff we love from Laravel. No promises at this point, but I think this is something I would really like to have in the library, because this could even evaluate the mutation testing experience further when it has more knowledge of the packages, the libraries, the framework you are going to use in your project. So to wrap it up, the only thing you need to do to start with mutation testing is to install Pest v3. And if you are using or you stay up to date with the latest version, you most likely already have Pest v3 installed. You need to specify which code you want to mutate, which classes you want to mutate. And then you have to pass the -- mutate option, or use the new function directly in PHP store. And if you want to, you can enforce the minimal threshold as well. Yeah, that's all I have for you today. I hope you learned something, and you will give mutation testing a try if you haven't yet. And I wish you happy testing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandro. That was excellent. Yeah, that definitely something I want to take a deeper dive on and have a look at and try to incorporate into some of my daily work for sure. I think one of the first points and kind of points you demonstrated there, Sandro, is so important to the concept of mutation testing and why would I want to do it. In that you show that example where you can have full code coverage on a piece of code, or full test coverage rather on a piece of code, and that doesn't tell the whole story, right? There's more than just covering the code with tests, right? So I think that was a nice demonstration of that. Have you ever run into those? I imagine maybe you've been burned by that in the past, where you have good coverage, but mutation testing would have benefited the code even more.
Yes, for sure. Especially in older projects, we enforced some kind of line coverage threshold in our CI pipeline. That's not bad per se, because you can see that you have at least one test. It's better than nothing, but it doesn't tell that much about the quality. Compared with mutation testing, you get much more feedback about the quality, but the problem is the performance. I think it's really hard in your CI pipeline to run mutation testing on the whole project all the time. That's really, really time consuming, and you don't want to wait for that. So there is still a reason why to use line coverage, I think. But I personally use mutation testing often directly after I wrote a controller or method or something like that. Then I start mutation testing and watch out for tests that I missed. I don't use it that much in CI pipelines yet.
Okay, so the mutation tests you're often running locally, but not necessarily in CI. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
For me, yeah, and most of the time, right after I wrote the code and the tests, I do prove my quality of the tests right away.
And that seems like a good time too, because that's when you know the most about that piece, or amongst the most about that piece of code you've just written, right? Your mind is very much focused on that problem you've solved. So that's probably a good time to maybe make the code more resilient, right?
Right. And that's the reason why I want to have it deeply integrated into Pest. It must be very easy to execute and to And no, I don't have to think about, oh, should I start mutation testing now or not? It's a fingertip away. Just add mutate and you have a result.
Absolutely. Do you have any on that topic? If I had an existing test suite and I wanted to add mutation testing to it, do you have any tips for people to get started? Like you said, I probably don't want to just turn it on for the whole test suite, right? This kind of reminds me of, I've been on projects where there's no like linting tools, and then linting gets added, and if you're not careful, all of a sudden every file in the project's getting touched, right, by linting. Yes. So in terms of adding mutation testing to an existing test suite, any tips on how to get started there, and what my first tests I might want to approach are?
I would look for the most business critical parts in your application. For example, if you have a namespace for actions, I think this is a good place to start. Maybe the controllers. So really the business critical functionalities is
Just a follow-up question to that. I guess how well does it scale for like larger applications with like extensive test suites? And so would you also, I don't know, I'm wondering, are there any performance trade-offs with that?
It doesn't matter how large the application is in the first place. It matters how much files it has to mutate. Because we had this very, very simple controller. We had already 7 or 8 mutations. If we have more complex controllers, you maybe end up with 100 mutations on one class. Then you have 1,000 classes or 100 classes. You have already 10,000 of mutations. Then it takes a long time. But even when you activate it for the whole project or use it in the whole project, you don't have to run it in one go. You can say, oh, I'm interested in mutating only this controller, this action, whatever, and then run this portion only. Otherwise, you have to wait half an hour for the result. And yeah, I think nobody wants to wait that long.
Yeah.
And I think you said, Sandro, that the plugin doesn't actually, no pun intended, mutate the code itself. It's not actually changing the files, right? So I would imagine then that a lot of this stuff is happening in memory. Is that correct?
Yes, more or less. That it hooks into the place where PHP reads the file from the file system.
Okay.
So there's a wrapper around this reading process, and then it injects the mutated file instead of the file from the file system.
Okay, and I asked that to just follow up with: are there ever any memory consumption issues I can run into, or I should be aware of avoiding?
Not really, because when it runs in parallel, as I said, every mutation is tested in a dedicated PHP process, which is terminated after the mutation. All the tests are run, so there shouldn't be a memory leak.
Excellent. Okay.
There was a comment in the comment section. Another question. In Stevie, I'm not exactly sure. I apologize if I pronounced your name wrong. But just to kind of elaborate a little bit more, I know that mutation testings can sometimes produce some false positives. How does the Pest PHP plugin handle such cases, and what steps can developers take to mitigate them? Do you mind elaborating on that a little bit, Sandro?
Yeah, it tries to avoid this as much as possible. In the sense that it tries to understand how PHP works and what is really a change and what is just the same written in a different syntax. So it tries to not make changes that does not really change the behavior of the application. But yeah, this can happen. And the only thing you can do then is to ignore it, either by just ignoring it and do nothing, or adding these annotations to ignore it for the following runs.
Oh, okay. It's like filtering a little bit more, I guess.
Yes, but it happens, but it does not happen that often. It's more often that you see a mutation and you are not interested in because it's a niche and a really niche thing, and you are not interested in writing a dedicated test for this.
Oh, okay.
That's more often the case.
Is there, I think you touched a little bit at the end there, Sandro, you made that point of like, hey, if you stick with like native PHP methods and error functions in some instances, the mutation will be able to know the inverse method to call, right? Whereas if we lean on, some of the niceties that Laravel brings, that might not be the case. I would imagine, but are there other instances where syntactically you would write your code different, knowing you would write it in such a way knowing in mind that you want to do mutation testing? And I asked specifically of the example you were showing validation rules, right? And in Laravel, like there's like so many places in the framework, there are multiple ways I can define validation rules for a specific field on a model, let's say. And one of them is I could have just a string and a pipe delimited string and say this is required pipe email, pipe unique in users table. Or I can also break that into like separate lines in an array. I would imagine the mutation would be better if I have it on separate lines because the mutator can go through and remove each of those rules versus it may not know how to break up that pipe separated string. Does that make sense? Would I write my validation rules differently in that instance, or does the plugin have my back on that regard?
Yes. I wrote the rules in array on separate lines. This wouldn't be necessary. It could be on one line, but it's better for the diffing output to show today because otherwise it's a long array string, a long array, and one word is missing. So that's more for better to present it in a better way. But the mutation testing plugin is not capable of the piped string syntax. It has no clue. The only thing it will do, it will remove the whole string. So that's what I talked about in the end. There is no understanding of the framework, but I think that's something that would be possible to add to a mutation testing framework. But this is, I think it's a little bit more work to do than the plain PHP syntax. But yeah, especially for validation rules or the collection helpers, now it can remove an item from an array, but it cannot remove an item from a collection. And there is a lot it could do if it would be aware of the underlying framework.
Yeah, I can understand, but I can certainly appreciate the complexity that would bring to try to add that support.
Yeah.
Sorry, Margaret, did you have, I think I might have cut you off. Did you have something?
No, those are good. And I think we've looked through the questions in the comments and we're good as well.
All right. Any other thoughts you wanted to share, Sandro, about mutation testing before we wind down here a little bit?
Yeah, not that much. Just give it a try, and I hope it brings some value to your daily workflow.
I have just a general question about the overall implementation. Looking at the dependencies in the composer JSON, like it seems like all of the work and the mutation logic and stuff is like first class, right? You've written that from the ground up. And so my question is just like, that must have been like quite a task and quite a feat to take on. And just curious, did you have experience with mutation testing in other languages, or did you read theory on mutation testing and how to approach the implementation of something like that?
I looked through the implementations from especially from different languages, because I don't do every mutation testing framework, even in the same languages, do not do the same mutations. So it's a bit of I had to decide which mutations I want to add to the framework or not, and I tried to find the ones that I think that make the most sense for me. So yeah, it's a bit opinionated.
Yeah, I can imagine, but yeah, I imagine that was a lot of research had to go into the implementation in addition to the implementation itself. So excellent. Really looking forward to giving that a try. Thank you. All right. And so I think that is it. Thank you, Sandro, for joining us once again. I'm just going to pop you backstage, and then Margaret and myself have a couple of housekeeping items to wrap up the talk today.
Thanks so much.
All right, and here we go. So yes, looking ahead to next month, Margaret, what do we got?
That's right. So next month, please join us on Tuesday, December 17th at 12 p.m. EST for a Q&A session with Taylor Otwell. We're going to be asking him some questions about Laravel Cloud and many other topics. And we'd also love to know if anyone in our audience, if you're watching this video now, to hit us up on X or on LinkedIn or whatever medium you can, or even in the comments of this video for any questions that you're interested in asking Taylor yourself. And so we're going to be taking a look and filtering through some questions, and we will have that ready for you next meetup. So a meetup you don't want to miss. And then we also have our JetBrains giveaway, so make sure to scan that QR code to be entered into our monthly draw. So big thank you to JetBrains for giving away 2 JetBrains IDEs every month for this meetup. And so here are the rules as well. So we're going to be announcing our winner on December 3rd, and all the other rules are here as well. And it's also international. So there's no way affiliated with YouTube. And all those details are there. So make sure to scan that QR code and then you can enter our draw.
All right.
Cool. And make sure to stay connected by following us on X at Laravel WW Meetup. We'll have a lot of our updates here for any future meetups and some little tidbits in between our meetups as well. And again, you're watching this video on YouTube, so thank you for joining us again today. Make sure to stay up to date with all of our reminders at meetup.laravel.com. If you can sign up there, for any invites or reminders about our meetups, and you'll never miss a single one. And again, our YouTube link as well. So thanks so much for joining us. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and you will never miss a future meetup.
There it is. All right. And we still have Rissa and Sandro backstage. Let's just bring them in very quickly and thank them once again. Rissa and Sandro, thank you very much both for joining us and sharing your insights today. 2 excellent talks, stuff that we can all take away and incorporate right away in our daily work. So thank you very much for sharing your wisdom today.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks for having us.
And with that, I'm going to say goodbye to everyone. Thank you for once again tuning in and joining us on the Laravel Worldwide Meetup. Hard to believe we've only got one left for the calendar year, but looking very much forward to Taylor Otwell joining us and doing some Q&A on Laravel Cloud and otherwise. So be sure to tune in for that one. And until then, take care, and we'll see you soon.
Take care. Bye.